Hey guys, tonight we begin with a moment of stillness. A breathless pause in the dark where your body won't move, your eyes won't close, and something is watching from the corner of the room. Your chest feels heavy, your limbs paralyzed, and you're caught in a strange, waking nightmare. This is sleep paralysis. And you, my friend, are not alone. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time. I always love seeing where in the world you're listening from, especially when we're about to descend into the spooky end of medieval sleep lore. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes, but your body stays still. That's the first sign. Your thoughts come online, slowly like someone lighting candles in a cathedral, but nothing else responds. You try to move a hand, nothing. Try to shift your leg, still nothing. The weight on your chest grows heavier, more insistent, like someone has sat down on you. And then you see it, in the corner, at the edge of the bed, just outside the flicker of firelight. A shape, vague, shifting, watching. If you've never experienced sleep paralysis, count yourself lucky. If you have, you already know the script. It's one of the most terrifying things a human mind can conjure, and yet it's so common that millions of people across time and cultures describe it with eerie consistency. A paralyzed body, a dark presence, a feeling of absolute dread. Sleep paralysis is what scientists call a parasomnia, a sleep disorder that occurs during the transition between wakefulness and REM sleep. Your mind becomes conscious before your body does, leaving you locked in a surreal limbo. You're awake, you're aware, but your body is still shut down, caught in the safety feature known as REM atonia, a natural paralysis that prevents you from acting out your dreams. Except now, you're not dreaming. You're trapped inside the tail end of one. And your brain, it doesn't like that one bit. Hallucinations are common. Some hear whispers. Others see figures. Shadowy, humanoid, often malevolent. The classic image, a dark silhouette standing at the edge of the bed, sometimes with glowing eyes, sometimes just a void, sometimes climbing onto your chest. You want to scream, but your voice is locked behind your tongue. You want to breathe deeply, but the weight is immense, and time crawls. Most episodes last less than a minute, but in the thick of it, it can feel eternal. And when it's finally over, when your body jolts back into motion and your voice returns, it's as though you've escaped something ancient, something that wasn't quite part of your dream, but wasn't quite gone either. Historians still argue whether sleep paralysis was recognized in the medieval world as a unique condition, or if it was folded entirely into spiritual and demonic interpretations. What we do know is that the experience itself, the frozen body, the oppressive dread, the nightmare presence, was very much known and feared. One of the most compelling things about sleep paralysis is how universal it is. Across continents and centuries, people describe the same strange encounter: a body that will not move, a presence that cannot be explained. And this consistency hints at something fundamental, something built deep into the brain's wiring. You're not weak, you're not cursed, you're human. But to a medieval mind, that presence wasn't neural misfiring, it was a demon, a witch, a night monster, sent by sin or summoned by dreams. And that's where this journey truly begins. Because in the dim, candlelit pages of medieval manuscripts, you find the same details echoed again and again: the night visitations, the choking weight, the paralysis, the creeping dread, the same sense that something is here with me and I can't stop it. The boundary between the waking world and the spiritual was thin in medieval Europe. Dreams were not just dreams, they were visions, warnings, omens. And when you woke paralyzed with fear and saw a figure looming above you, it wasn't an illusion. It was a punishment, a presence, proof of a sin you had forgotten, or a spirit that had not. And the stories they left behind? Chilling, specific, unsettlingly familiar. You start to wonder, did they feel what you felt? Did they wake in the night, try to scream and stare into the same darkness? Did they draw the same shapes, give them horns and wings, and call them demons? Because what sleep paralysis gives us more than fear is a rare window. A crack between the physical and the imagined, between science and belief, between the quiet hum of REM sleep and the screaming panic of a world that once believed monsters rode through the night on clouds of shadow. And in that space, In that stillness, the demons wait. You blink. The figure is still there. It hasn't moved, but neither have you. Frozen beneath your blanket, you can only watch as the shadow seems to breathe with the room, pulsing in the dark. It doesn't speak. It doesn't touch. It only is. And for a moment, your mind spins in circles, trying to make sense of something that should not be possible. Welcome to the cold, clinical truth behind sleep paralysis, because even the monsters have a biology. At its heart, sleep paralysis is the result of a misfire between sleep cycles. Normally, when you enter REM sleep, rapid eye movement, the dream phase, your brain activates vivid imagery, narratives, and, well, dreams. But it also sends signals to shut down your muscles. This is REM-atonia, a protective measure that keeps you from leaping out of bed when your dream self decides to run from wolves or kiss the town blacksmith. Sometimes, though, things don't switch off cleanly. You wake up mentally, eyes open, thoughts forming, but your body hasn't received the memo. You're trapped in the tail end of REM. And worse, your dream-creating brain might still be firing. The result? Hallucinations that feel realer than real. The dark figure, the pressure on your chest, the whisper in your ear. These are not just your imagination running wild. They're your brain trying to reconcile two overlapping realities. You're awake, but still dreaming. You're conscious, but still paralyzed. And your amygdala, the part of your brain that processes fear, it's sounding every alarm. Historians still argue whether ancient and medieval scholars recognize this disconnect between mind and body, or if they interpreted it purely through the lens of spirits and punishment. Some monastic texts hint at false awakenings, where monks described waking in their cells, unable to move, plagued by devils. Today, a sleep doctor might diagnose it as a textbook parasomnia. Back then, it meant you had sin to confess. Common features of sleep paralysis are remarkably consistent across cultures and time periods. The feeling of being watched, the sense of evil in the room, an immense pressure on the chest, often interpreted as a demon sitting atop the sleeper. In medical terms, this sensation may be caused by the inability to control your breathing muscles fully while partially awake. But to the brain, it feels like suffocation, like something heavy and hateful is pushing down on you. And then there's the figure. Sometimes it's vague, a shadow without detail. Other times it's painfully specific, a woman with long black hair and empty eyes, a man with a broad hat and no face, a creature crawling up from beneath the bed, limbs jerking like a puppet. These hallucinations are shaped by fear and culture, but the structure remains the same. Something is here, and it means harm. Modern science has studied this phenomenon extensively. MRI scans show that during sleep paralysis, parts of the brain responsible for threat detection and facial recognition remain active. That means you're more likely to perceive a face, even in meaningless shapes, your coat on the chair, the way shadows fall on the wall. Your brain fills in the blanks with your deepest fears. And when you're afraid, you freeze, which only makes it worse. Fringe theories still pop up today. Some believe these episodes are evidence of alternate dimensions, astral projection gone wrong, or even alien visitations. The shadow person, they say, isn't a hallucination at all, but a being from beyond, using your frozen moment to observe. The fact that these figures show up across history only adds to the mystery. But neuroscience has other explanations. Stress, irregular sleep, jet lag, anxiety, and trauma can all increase the chances of experiencing sleep paralysis. People with narcolepsy or insomnia report it more often. Students pulling all-nighters? High risk. Parents of newborns? Definitely. Medieval peasants overworked and underfed? Absolutely. And yet, even when you know the science, even when you understand REM cycles and brain chemistry and hallucination triggers, it doesn't help in the moment. Because when you open your eyes and see that thing standing by your bed, your body frozen, your lungs shallow, you don't think this is a REM intrusion. You think, I am not alone. And there's something primal about it. Some evolutionary artifact that says, you're helpless, there's danger, you're prey. It doesn't matter that it's a trick of the mind. What matters is that it feels real. That's why we remember it. That's why we fear it. So tonight, as you tuck yourself into bed and the darkness creeps in from the corners of the room, you can remind yourself, sleep paralysis is a glitch, a neurological hiccup, nothing more. But when it comes, and your eyes open, and the shadow appears, it won't feel like science. It will feel like something very, very old has come to visit you again. You stare into the dark, still. Silent. The figure hasn't moved, it doesn't need to. It just exists, and that's enough to drown your thoughts in dread. Your breath is shallow, your limbs limp, and every second stretches like pulled thread. What is it that makes the mind conjure such vivid terror? And why is it always a shadow? Why not a bunny? A bowl of soup? Why always this faceless thing hovering at the edge of your bed like a nightmare that woke up with you? Sleep paralysis hallucinations have remarkable consistency. Around the world, people describe the same key elements: a dark shape in the room, a crushing weight on the chest, a profound sense of evil. This night visitor wears many guises, but at its core, it's always a presence. Not quite seen, not quite real, but utterly convincing. Modern science explains this as a collision between waking consciousness and residual dream state brain activity. Your mind still hallucinates, but your eyes are open. But the details of these visions are deeply influenced by culture, folklore, and personal fear. That's why the figure so often resembles things that terrified your ancestors. Take the classic shadow person. You've probably heard of them. Tall, featureless, humanoid silhouettes seen during sleep paralysis. Some have glowing eyes. Others wear brimmed hats. Some crouch in the corners. Others stand silently at your bedside like they're waiting for permission to speak. It's not just you. People in completely different parts of the world have seen them too, and they've been seeing them for centuries. Historians still argue whether these entities are shaped by cultural storytelling or if they've shaped it themselves. Did our ancestors invent demons to explain the shadows they saw during paralysis? Or did the experience of paralysis evolve because our culture primed us to see them that way? Medieval accounts are full of pressing demons, spirits that sit on sleepers and crush their breath. Often, these demons are said to whisper, to tempt, or to siphon away the soul. The terror is always nocturnal, always paralyzing, always real to the sufferer. These stories didn't fade over time, they transformed. The demons of old became today's night stalkers. In some cultures, the figure is described as a woman, long black hair, pale skin, blank expression. She may stand silently or sit on your chest, watching. In others, it's a man-shaped void with no face at all. Sometimes it's animalistic, a snarling dog or cat crouched and hissing at your paralysis. But in nearly every version, it's dark, threatening, and closer than comfort allows. One fringe detail? Some sufferers of sleep paralysis report the figure moving closer each time they experience an episode, as if it learns. Others claim they always see it at the same distance, just out of reach, like it's anchored to a specific point in the room. These consistencies, while likely neurological, give the whole experience the haunting feeling of ritual and the dread. That's the part people struggle to explain. It's not just fear. It's pure malevolence, a suffocating certainty that the thing means you harm. Not in a jump scare kind of way, but in a deep, ancient, soul-level kind of way. Your body reacts with full-blown panic, but you can't move. You can't fight. All you can do is endure. Researchers believe this emotional flood comes from the amygdala, your brain's fear center, activating in the absence of real sensory input. With your senses muffled by paralysis, your brain fills the silence with danger. It's like your brain says, I don't know what's happening, but we're gonna die. And then it builds the death scene for you. One curious detail from medieval accounts: some sufferers said the demon didn't just press, it whispered. Things they couldn't remember clearly, but that made their skin crawl. Some claim the figure knew things about them: sins, secrets, guilt. It wasn't just a presence, it was a judge. A reminder that no matter how much you prayed, something in the dark had not forgiven you. And yet, for all its horror, the paralysis eventually breaks. Your fingers twitch, your breath deepens, the figure fades like smoke, you wake fully, light returns, but the feeling stays that something came for you in the night, and maybe it will come again. Modern sufferers describe the same thing. The moment of awakening feels like surfacing from a black ocean. You're sweating, heart pounding. But when you look around, there's nothing there. No footprints, no open door. Just the silence you woke into, now impossibly loud. Still, you avoid looking too closely into the shadows, just in case. So tonight, If you wake in the small hours and feel the weight of something not there pressing on your chest, if your body won't obey and the room holds its breath with you, remember, you are not broken. You are not alone. But also, maybe don't look at the foot of the bed. You sit up in bed, drenched in sweat, breath having like you just outran a pack of wolves. But you didn't run. You couldn't. Something held you still. Something watched. You rub your eyes, shake your head, and try to laugh it off, but deep down, you know this isn't new. People have been waking to this nightmare for centuries. And if you want proof, all you have to do is crack open a few medieval texts, because they were seeing it too. In the candlelit corners of monasteries and manor libraries, monks and scholars wrote about things that visited sleepers. They didn't use terms like rematonia or hallucination. No, they used words like daemonium nocturnum, night demon. And what they described sounds eerily familiar. One of the most chilling examples is a 13th century manuscript in which a monk details his own nocturnal torment. Paralyzed, pinned beneath an invisible weight, sat unable to scream while something crouched atop his chest. He writes of feeling claws, not touching but hovering, just close enough to chill his bones. His conclusion? He had been visited by a demon sent to test his soul. You read it today and can't help but think, that's sleep paralysis. But to him, it was spiritual warfare. Medieval bestiaries and dream manuals often include strange, shadowy creatures who lurk at night, sapping strength or planting impure thoughts. These were not metaphors. They were real threats. Illustrations show distorted beasts crouching over sleeping bodies, their eyes blank, their hands extended in possession. They were drawn in the margins of prayer books, scribbled in the back pages of family Bibles. Keep praying, the monks would write, lest the night spirit take you. Historians still argue whether these descriptions were literal experiences, shared by many, or allegorical warnings meant to reinforce moral lessons. Was the creature meant to symbolize temptation, or was it based on something every monk at some point had felt, that same frozen terror in the dead of night? The truth likely lies in between. In an age without science, experience was explained through symbols, and sleep paralysis, so vivid, so physical, so impossible to ignore, needed a name. That name became demon, and not just any demon. The mare, the root of our word nightmare, was a particularly common figure. She was said to ride the chests of sleepers, stealing breath, sowing fear, and feeding on vitality. Descriptions vary, sometimes a hag, sometimes a beautiful woman, sometimes a black shadow with glowing eyes, but the role was always the same: to paralyze, to terrify, to mark. One fringe belief from Norse sagas, that the mare could be a living person's spirit sent out during sleep to torment others. Villagers would accuse each other of being riders, souls who left their bodies at night to sit on others and cause pain. The accused were sometimes punished or prayed over, depending on the severity of the attacks. Sound familiar? Elsewhere in Europe, we see writings about demon familiars who sat on their victims to drain them of virtue. In court records, people confess to feeling demons in the night, especially during witch trials. The pressure, the inability to move, the shameful visions that followed, it was all chalked up to infernal visitation, sleep paralysis by another name. Art tells the same story. You've probably seen The Nightmare by Henry Fuseli, painted centuries after the medieval period, but drenched in its spirit. A woman sprawled on her bed, eyes closed in agony, while a goblin-like incubus squats on her chest and a horse's head looms from the curtain. It's iconic, and it's almost word for word what monks were describing long before Fuseli ever picked up a brush. You start to realize this isn't just folklore, it's documentation. A living archive of human experience shaped by fear, religion, and the mystery of the mind's darkest hours. Even common folk left their traces. Marginal notes in cookbooks, scratched prayers on the inside of doors, folk remedies to ward off the rider. It was known, it was named, it was feared. And most importantly, it was shared. So tonight, when you lie in bed and feel the weight of the air press heavier than it should, when the shadows seem to shift just a little too purposefully, you're not stepping into something new. You're walking the same path as countless souls before you. And maybe, just maybe, they left you a few warnings in ink and parchment. The night has grown heavier now. Somewhere outside, a dog lets out a low growl before falling silent. Inside, the fire flickers and you shift in your straw-filled bedding. Your breath catches slightly. Not again, you think. Not tonight. And then it starts. The wait, the silence, the slow descent of fear. But tonight, let's give that fear a face. Or two. Because in the world of medieval sleep terrors, there were names for these visitors, incubus and succubus. Demons not only feared but desired, or rather, feared because they were desired. And what they did to you in the night went beyond watching from the shadows. An incubus was a male demon, thought to lie upon sleeping women, drawing energy and planting sin. The succubus was his female counterpart, seducing men in dreams, draining life through pleasure. These weren't just lustful myths. In medieval theology and folklore, they were considered very real, and often blamed for anything from nocturnal emissions to spontaneous pregnancy, or simply for waking up feeling drained. These demons, like sleep paralysis, came in the night. They paralyzed their victims. They rendered them mute. And they always arrived during sleep, when the mind was weakest and the soul most vulnerable. Historians still argue whether incubi and succubi were invented to explain sleep paralysis or to control behavior through fear. Probably both. In a society obsessed with purity, sexuality was always suspicious, and a nighttime visitation that left you breathless, still, and ashamed was the perfect cautionary tale, especially when no one dared speak of such things openly. But these stories didn't just come from clergy wagging fingers. Victims described them in confessionals, in diaries, in the margins of illuminated texts. One monk writes of waking to find a beautiful woman at the foot of his bed. He could not speak, could not move, and in his words, "She climbed over me like death cloaked in perfume." He interpreted it as temptation, sent to test his faith. Others saw it as punishment. One fringe tale from the Malleus Maleficarum, that infamous 15th century witch-hunting manual, claims that succubi could collect the seed of men in their sleep and transfer it to other women, making them pregnant without physical contact. A divine loophole turned diabolical. These fears weren't just about sleep paralysis. They were about control, shame, and the deep terror of what might happen to your body while you slept. The incubus, in particular, was described in many ways, sometimes hideous, with clawed feet and stinking breath, sometimes beautiful, angelic even, but with eyes that never blinked. Victims said they felt something pressing them down, stealing their breath. Sometimes it felt like seduction, sometimes like suffocation. Always it felt real. Even the church had a complicated relationship with these demons. Some theologians claimed they were fallen angels, cursed to wander and tempt. Others believed they were mere hallucinations, sent by Satan to trick the faithful. But still, exorcisms were performed, prayers were offered, and people were told to sleep with holy objects near their bed, just in case. What's especially eerie is how similar these descriptions are to modern sleep paralysis accounts. A presence, a weight, a sense of violation, a paralyzing fear. Whether interpreted as lust or horror, the experience is constant. The hallucination shifts with culture, but the structure, the paralysis, the visitation, the aftermath is unchanged. In some cases, people even claim to fall in love with their night visitors. That's where the line between dream and desire blurred even more. There are letters, real letters, where women begged the church for forgiveness after entertaining a demon in their dreams. Not because they wanted it, but because it felt that real. The shame was real. The exhaustion was real. The silence after? Realer still. There were remedies, of course. Sleep with a knife under your pillow. Line your doorway with salt. Burn rosemary or St. John's wort in the evening. Tie a red ribbon around your wrist. Whisper a psalm before bed. Some even slept on the floor to confuse the demons who were said to expect bodies at certain heights, as if demonic creatures needed ergonomic alignment. A fringe belief in Brittany claimed that wearing your shirt inside out at bedtime would confuse the succubus, forcing her to leave. In Italy, a bowl of milk placed at the windowsill would distract the demon. Whether these worked or not, people clung to them because the fear wasn't imagined. The experience was undeniable. So tonight, as you pull the blanket tighter, you wonder, was it just a dream? Just a product of stress, of fatigue, of your brain misfiring in the dark? Or was it something older? Something that has crept through centuries of folklore and faith, changing names and faces, but never leaving. Perhaps the incubus still visits, perhaps the succubus still waits. Not in hell, not in stories, but in the space between breath and body, where dreams still think they rule. You pull the covers up just a little higher, heart still not quite settled. The last thing you want to think about is another long-fingered visitor in the night. But the truth is, the stories didn't stop with the incubus or succubus. No, medieval Europe had many names for what haunted you in your sleep. And one of the most enduring was the image of a witch, the classic kind, riding your chest like a beast of burden, whispering curses into your paralyzed ears. This wasn't metaphor, it was called being ridden by a witch, and for hundreds of years, it was the leading explanation for what we now call sleep paralysis. The chest pressure, her weight. The inability to move, her magic. The nightmares, her evil intentions swirling through your unconscious like fog. In Germany, they called it the Alp, a goblin-like creature that would creep into your bedroom, sit on your chest, and feed on your life force through your breath. The Alp was often blamed when people woke screaming or drenched in sweat, paralyzed and panicked. It didn't matter if the Alp was invisible. Its presence was the evidence. Historians still argue whether these tales of witches and spirits were created to explain the experience of sleep paralysis, or whether they were cultural overlays on something much older, some shared human nightmare hardwired into our brains. Either way, the result was the same: fear, helplessness, and stories to pass on just in case the thing returned. In England, they had another name, the hag, as in the old hag is riding you. A classic image, a shriveled woman crouched on your chest whispering horrible things, her fingers hooked into your ribs. She might suck out your breath, she might curse your heart, she might just stare at you until you cried. She wasn't just a figure of speech, she was a diagnosis. If you complained of waking up stiff, exhausted, and terrified, it meant the hag had paid a visit. You see the pattern yet? Night visitor, chest pressure, paralysis, dread. Whether it's the hag, the Alp, or a faceless figure in a hoodie, the blueprint is the same, and it went further. In some parts of France and Italy, it was believed witches could send their spirits out at night while their bodies slept. These wandering spirits, strighe, lamie, benandanti, would fly to others' homes and torment them in their dreams. You didn't need to be awake to be guilty. If your neighbor had sleep paralysis and you were weird or widowed or just a bit too red-haired, you might be blamed. One fringe belief: witches didn't need a broomstick. They rode humans themselves, pinning them down and guiding their spirits through walls and windows to attend Sabbaths in the woods. If you woke from sleep paralyzed and drenched in sweat, it wasn't just a bad night, it meant you had been used. Your body, a borrowed horse. Your soul, forced to attend some infernal gathering. Sounds dramatic, but these beliefs were deadly. People, especially women, were accused, tortured, and executed based on stories that could all begin with one poor soul whispering, "I couldn't move, and she was there." Sleep paralysis wasn't just a terrifying experience, it was evidence. Even the infamous witch-hunting texts, like the Malleus Maleficarum, reference these experiences. They describe devils and witches suffocating the righteous in their sleep, entering rooms through cracks conjured by envy or lust. The solutions? Prayer, holy water, confession. Never mind that the same symptoms occurred to the devout and sinful alike. If you suffered, you needed to be cleansed. And in the countryside, folk magic offered its own methods. One popular remedy: placing a broomstick beside your bed to distract the witch. She'd count the bristles until morning. Another, turning your shoes upside down to confuse her footsteps. Or, most bizarrely, sleeping with your rear end exposed to offend her enough to leave. Because apparently, even witches have standards. Still, one thing is certain: the pattern persisted. A dark visitor, a frozen body, a sense of malevolence that passed only with the dawn. The names changed, the rituals shifted, but the core experience remained remarkably, chillingly the same. So next time you hear someone joke about the old hag or the witch riding your chest, don't brush it off. That phrase carries centuries of fear, passed down like lullabies for the damned. And if you wake in the night, your body still is stone and the air thick with dread, well, maybe it's just stress. Maybe it's your brain. Or maybe someone left the broom by your door unlocked. You lie back, eyes closed, thinking it's over, that the worst is behind you. But sleep comes cautiously now, like a guest afraid to knock. And in that quiet, in that stillness, where the mind softens but doesn't yet dream, something ancient begins to stir again, not in your room, not even in your head, but in the shared vault of memory that spans centuries, cultures, and borders. Because sleep paralysis isn't a medieval anomaly, it's a global haunting. It turns out almost every culture in recorded history has described this terrifying half-sleep state. Whether they called it a witch, a ghost, or a demon, the story is the same. A paralyzed body, a looming presence, a dread that leaves fingerprints on your soul. If this is just a brain hiccup, it's one we've been having across the world forever. In Japan, it's called kanashibari. The word literally means bound in metal. It's the feeling of being tightly wrapped, frozen, as if tied up by an unseen force. Japanese folklore often blames angry spirits, yurei, especially if you've wronged someone or disturbed sacred grounds. Some say if you sleep with your feet pointing toward the door, the spirit can find its way in. That's why even today, many avoid lying that way. In Thailand, they call it phi am, a ghost that squats on your chest while you sleep. And in many Thai households, people hang protective charms or blessed cloth over their beds to ward it off. The symptoms? Identical. The dread? Personal. Historians still argue whether these cultural legends evolved independently or share a common ancient origin. But the similarities are striking. In Newfoundland, Canada, settlers brought stories of the old hag with them from England. Indigenous peoples in Central America tell of the pasanta, a creature that enters homes and sits on sleeping chests like a monstrous cat. In African traditions, sleep paralysis may be linked to spiritual attacks, especially when your soul is seen as exposed or unprotected during rest. In South Sudan, the czar is a spirit that invades the vulnerable, especially during sleep. If afflicted, rituals are performed to appease or drive out the intruder. These aren't bedtime stories, they're lived experiences, real to the communities that carry them. A fringe belief in parts of the Caribbean that sleep paralysis is a sign of spiritual calling, that you are meant to become a healer, but the spirits are testing you in your dreams first. It's terrifying, yes, but also sacred. Suffering becomes purpose. The visitor isn't an enemy, it's a tutor. And then, of course, we have the more modern myths. Ever hear of alien abductions, waking in the night, paralyzed, unable to scream, a bright light, a shadowy figure hovering near the bed? Sounds oddly familiar, doesn't it? While we've replaced witches with greys and imps with UFOs, the bones of the story haven't changed. The terror's costume just got a sci-fi makeover. You begin to see the pattern, the timelessness, the humanness of it all. Across borders and belief systems, we dream the same dark shapes. We wake with the same silent scream. Whether it's a demon, a ghost, or a traveler from Zeta Reticuli, the thing we fear isn't the visitor. It's the feeling of being completely helpless. One academic theory, these stories act like cultural pressure valves. They give people a way to describe trauma they don't have words for. Especially in societies where speaking openly about fear, grief, or shame wasn't allowed. Sleep paralysis becomes the avatar of that suffering, a socially acceptable monster. Another view, these legends provide control. You can't prevent the experience, but you can hang garlic, recite a prayer, burn sage, sleep facing west. Folklore gives structure to chaos, even if it doesn't stop the terror. And yet some argue the opposite, that by naming the experience, by personifying it, we make it worse. That believing in the monster gives it power. That maybe if we never told the story, we wouldn't see the thing in the dark at all. But can silence ever unwrite fear? Tonight, as you curl deeper under your blanket and check the corners of your room for the 100th time, remember, you're part of a global tradition. One massive, whispering campfire of terrified sleepers who've all seen the same thing, described the same shape, gasped the same breathless panic, different languages, different monsters, same frozen moment, same eyes in the dark. You shift beneath the blankets, trying to convince yourself it's just stories, just brain chemistry. But the stories linger, not just as legends or folktales, but as something people truly lived. And no one in medieval Europe lived more completely within the boundary of sleep, spirit, and science than the church. If your limbs locked in place at midnight, if your chest burned under invisible weight, if your screams never left your throat, there was one explanation. The devil had come calling, or his agents. And the only defense? Faith, or a priest. The medieval church taught that nighttime attacks were often the work of demons, exploiting moments of weakness. Sleep was a vulnerable state. In sleep, your soul might wander. Your body lay defenseless. The gates between the visible and invisible were slightly ajar. And if your mind was impure, your thoughts lustful, your faith wavering, well, that was like leaving a lantern lit for the damned to find you. Nocturni oppressionis, some Latin texts called it, night oppression. A spiritual weight, not just a metaphor, but a felt pressure, often said to be accompanied by temptation or overwhelming guilt. People believed they were being punished, tested, or claimed. And when they awoke, breathless and terrified, the answer wasn't medicine. It was confession. Historians still argue whether the church genuinely believed these were demonic attacks or whether they used the framework of sleep terror to enforce behavioral codes. Likely both. After all, if a monk dreamed of a succubus and awoke in terror, it was evidence of lust and weakness. Better report it to the abbot. Better whip the flesh and purify the spirit. Medieval sermons warned that Satan waits by your bed like a lion in the grass. Not just poetic, literal. Some priests preached that the devil used sleep to test your resolve, your mind, even your dreams. A pleasant dream? Dangerous. A frightening one? Even more so, because that meant he had gotten close. This thinking spilled into remedies as well. Holy water sprinkled before sleep. Prayers said aloud while lying down. Sleeping with a crucifix on your chest to ward off possession. Some even clutched saint medallions or left a lit candle to remind the darkness it was not welcome. You'd think fire hazards would deter this, but no. Better a scorched bed than a stolen soul. A fringe practice among monastics was the night vigil, staying awake through the dangerous hours, chanting psalms to keep the spirits at bay. For some, this was about discipline. For others, it was desperation. The only thing worse than sleeplessness was what might come during sleep. And what about the poor souls who suffered often? Repeated paralysis. Night after night, these people were pitied, yes, but also feared. Some thought their bodies were battlefields. Others thought they were cursed. Whispers might spread. Maybe she made a deal. Maybe he opened a door. People were confessed for their dreams, even when those dreams were nightmares. One priest's journal from the 14th century describes a woman who came to him claiming, "The black man visits nightly, standing in the corner unmoving until I awake." The priest fasted and prayed with her for 3 days. The figure stopped, then returned. His solution? Exorcism. Not of her house, of her bed. And this wasn't just rural superstition. Learned men, scholars, bishops, wrote detailed treatises on demonic dreams. They categorized them. Visions from God, temptations from Satan, reflections of the self. But always, they agreed on one thing. A dream that left you afraid and paralyzed was not natural. And if your eyes opened during it, if you lay frozen, heart racing, shadows forming at the edge of sight, that wasn't a dream anymore. That was something knocking. There were even tests to determine if a demon had visited. One was to look for bruises on the chest or limbs, signs of spiritual pressure. Another was to sleep in a church overnight. If you were truly tormented, the spirit wouldn't follow you into holy ground. But if it did, well, then you needed more than prayer. And all of this existed before modern neuroscience, before EEG machines and sleep clinics, before we could scan a brain and say, "Ah, yes, your amygdala lit up like a Christmas tree." They had no such tools, only fear, patterns, stories, and faith, and perhaps a bit of truth. Because no matter how much science explains, the experience itself remains unchanged. A locked body, a shadow in the room, a weight not seen but absolutely felt. So tonight you lie still, not in fear, not in surrender, but in awe at how long we've lived with this thing. How many prayers it's pulled from trembling lips, how many saints it's summoned, how many stories it's written without ever holding a pen. You'd think the monks and priests had the monopoly on night terrors, but you'd be wrong. Step outside the monasteries and into the homes of ordinary folk, and you'll find that common people had their own way of explaining and surviving the nocturnal horrors. The world might have lacked microscopes, but it certainly didn't lack imagination. And for those who suffered from sleep paralysis, the medieval countryside was a patchwork of whispered wisdom and practical panic. Let's begin with the folk traditions. Because long before people reached for psalters or holy water, they turned to herbs, charms, and old wives' advice passed down through soot-stained generations. In many villages, it was believed that a malevolent spirit, often unnamed, could ride you in your sleep. If you woke unable to move, the diagnosis was clear. The night rider had come. The solution? Salt. Salt was life. Sprinkle it in a circle around your bed. Pour a line across the doorway. Rub it into the soles of your feet. Salt was believed to purify and protect, confusing spirits and blocking their entrance. Another trick, turn your pillow upside down before sleep. Or, even more delightfully bizarre, sleep with a wooden spoon under your mattress, a surprisingly widespread remedy across parts of rural France and Wales. Historians still argue whether these rituals genuinely reduced the occurrence of sleep paralysis, or simply created a sense of control in an otherwise helpless state. But one thing is clear, people took their sleep seriously, and if a shadow kept showing up, they weren't going to wait around unprepared. In Slavic regions, villagers sometimes placed an iron object, like a knife or nail, under their bed or between the mattress and frame. Iron, in folklore, was thought to repel spirits. It had weight, permanence. It was earthly, solid, everything the night visitor was not. And if the spirit came anyway, well, at least your superstitions were well armed. Even more fringe, in some pockets of Eastern Europe, a chicken feather placed in your pillow was said to ward off nighttime demons. Not any feather, mind you. A feather plucked from a black rooster at midnight, no less. Easy recipe, right? And what if you didn't want to ward the spirit off, but instead trap it? That's where dream catchers in Native American cultures, or spirit nets in some European variants, come into play. Hung above the bed, these woven tools were said to catch not only dreams, but entities, keeping you safe until sunrise. But not everyone wanted to fight. Some simply endured. A few folktales suggest the shadowy visitor wasn't always malevolent. In rare cases, the being was said to bring premonitions or spiritual insight. In Irish tradition, a woman who was ridden by the fair folk might wake with knowledge she didn't have before. A prediction, a curse lifted, a song never heard but somehow remembered. You start to see how fluid the boundary was between terror and mysticism. The same paralysis that felt like a curse in one region might be seen as a sign of spiritual sensitivity in another. Were you cursed or gifted? Were you haunted or chosen? One particularly strange belief from 14th century Brittany insisted that if you spoke the name of the last person you dreamed of, upon waking from sleep paralysis, the spirit would be released and the curse broken. Some believed that saying the name out loud would even transfer the visitation to that person next. Medieval chain letters, essentially, just sweatier. And let's not forget dream interpretation. You didn't just wake up and move on. No, if you experienced a nightmare where you couldn't scream or move, the entire village might get involved in its meaning. Was it a warning? A punishment? A sign your soul had wandered too far? Some believed your spirit might not fully return to your body after a particularly strong episode unless certain rites were performed. A fringe tidbit here. In parts of rural Norway, people believed the soul was tethered to the body by a silver thread during sleep. If something cut or stretched the thread, say a demon riding your chest, it could leave your soul loose, resulting in a host of issues from memory loss to infertility. So, naturally, couples kept silver scissors by the bedside, as one does. The common thread through all of this? A universal refusal to accept the experience as meaningless. People needed it to mean something, and in doing so, they created a vast, rich, eerily consistent mythology across languages, landscapes, and centuries. Because deep down, we all want to believe that suffering isn't random, that the things that freeze us, haunt us, make us gasp in the night, aren't just quirks of REM sleep, but messages from somewhere. Someone. So tonight, if you feel that pull, that weight pressing into your chest, that panic sliding through your veins like cold wine, know that you're standing on a long, strange bridge. One made of ash circles, rooster feathers, and salt lines. A bridge connecting you to shepherds, seamstresses, monks, and warriors. People who stared into the same darkness and whispered the same question: what is it that visits us while we sleep? It's nearly midnight now. Your room is quiet, too quiet, just the faint ticking of something mechanical, or maybe it's your heartbeat pretending to be brave. You've heard the tales, felt the tension. But still, one question keeps spinning in your mind like a weather vane in a storm. What's actually happening during sleep paralysis? Let's shift the candlelight now. not toward demons or old wives' charms, but into the flickering world of early science, where medicine and superstition blurred like ink in rain. Because even back then, a few brave minds tried to look past folklore and into the body itself. Some medieval physicians believed the cause of sleep paralysis wasn't demonic, but digestive. Yes, really. A heavy stomach, as they called it, could weigh down the spirit during sleep. They argued that undigested food caused vapors to rise to the brain, clouding the senses and pinning the limbs. You weren't cursed, you just had too much stew. A fringe take, but surprisingly persistent. Another theory? Black bile. One of the four humors that controlled the body's health. Too much of it, they said, made the mind heavy, melancholic, and more susceptible to bad dreams and immobility. It's not far off from today's recognition that anxiety, stress, and depression are linked to sleep paralysis episodes. Turns out medieval science, while primitive, wasn't completely off the mark. Historians still argue whether early physicians genuinely believed their theories or simply crafted them to compete with the church's spiritual dominance. After all, who would you rather visit? A priest who sprinkles water or a doctor who prescribes peppermint and prayer in equal measure? Fast forward a few centuries, and we enter the Enlightenment. The shadows begin to lift. Philosophers like Descartes toyed with the idea of mind-body dualism, believing that consciousness might function separately from physical experience. Sleep paralysis was viewed as a moment when the mind was awake, but the body was not yet reunited with it. A spiritual idea wearing a lab coat. Then came physiology, actual medical science. In the 18th and 19th centuries, sleep became an object of real study. Physicians began noting cases of nocturnal paralysis in journals. One doctor described it as a state in which the faculties of reason persist, though volition is suspended. Poetic and clinical, both. The game changer arrived in the 20th century with the discovery of REM sleep, rapid eye movement. Scientists realized that during this phase, the body becomes temporarily paralyzed. It's a natural process to keep you from acting out your dreams. But in sleep paralysis, your consciousness wakes up before your body does, creating that awful in-between space, that locked-in moment where your eyes see, your mind races, but your limbs don't. And those hallucinations, they're real. Well, real to you. When your brain detects a threat, even imagined, it generates vivid imagery. Shadow figures, whispering voices, pressure on the chest. Your amygdala, the brain's fear center, goes into overdrive. You see things because your brain needs a reason for the fear it's feeling. One study in 1999 even suggested that up to 8% of the global population experiences sleep paralysis regularly. That's tens of millions of people who have woken in the night feeling like someone or something is in the room. Another fringe theory? That sleep paralysis may be linked to lucid dreaming, where the dreamer becomes aware and sometimes gains control of the dream. Some researchers suggest that sleep paralysis could be a doorway state between waking and dreaming, a threshold, a crack in the cognitive wall. Still, despite all this understanding, the terror persists. Knowing it's just your brain doesn't stop the fear. In fact, for some, it makes it worse, because what's more terrifying, a demon crouching on your chest, or your own mind conjuring one from thin air? Modern therapists now treat recurrent sleep paralysis through CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. They teach patients how to manage stress, regulate sleep schedules, and avoid known triggers like alcohol, sleep deprivation, or irregular bedtime routines. Some even suggest sleeping on your side instead of your back, since many episodes occur while lying flat. But even now, in an age of science and medicine, people still report the same experiences. Still draw the same shapes, still whisper about a figure in the corner. And here's the twist. Modern science hasn't banished the folklore. It's joined it. There are YouTube channels dedicated to shadow people sightings, Reddit threads where people compare notes about what the man with the hat said, TikToks that reenact experiences with uncanny accuracy. It's not that we stopped seeing the shadows, we just gave them Wi-Fi. So tonight, as you lie in bed, mind sharp, body soft, the line between wake and dream flickering like candlelight, you realize this isn't a story of either science or spirits. It's both. A demon in the mind, a fear with a name, a shadow made from thousands of years of dreams and data. By now, you've probably noticed something strange about this journey through shadows and science. No matter how much we try to explain sleep paralysis, we keep circling back to one truth. It feels personal, as if the experience isn't just terrifying, but targeted, like something is watching not just anyone, but you. And that's where we enter the quiet corridor of modern folklore. Because in this supposedly enlightened age of clinical diagnoses and medical charts, we're still whispering stories, still drawing the same shapes, still seeing the same figure. One of the most famous modern manifestations is something you might have already heard of: the Hat Man. He doesn't move. He doesn't speak. But those who've seen him, millions reportedly, describe the same thing: a tall, shadowy figure in a wide-brimmed hat standing motionless in the corner of the room during a paralysis episode. His features are unclear, sometimes entirely obscured. His presence? Unmistakable. He doesn't approach, doesn't sit on your chest. He simply watches. Historians still argue whether the Hat Man is a new creation of internet myth-sharing or an ancient archetype that's adapted to modern fears. Some psychologists argue he's a cultural echo, born of noir films, shadowy detectives, and trench-coat-wearing villains. Others point to medieval figures that resemble him: plague doctors, executioners, or even illustrations of demons wearing robes and hoods. Fringe believers take it further. They say the Hat Man is a real entity, a trans-dimensional being who feeds on fear, appearing during sleep paralysis to harvest something from us. Energy, perhaps, or information. One theory even proposes he's part of a hierarchy of beings. The Hat Man is a commander, and the smaller faceless shadows are his scouts. You want to laugh. You want to dismiss it. But then you remember you've seen him too, haven't you? Maybe not with clarity, maybe just a feeling. But the description rings a bell you didn't know you had. He's not alone. Modern sleepers report a cast of recurring characters, as if these nightmares have entered syndication. There's the old woman who crawls toward you, mouth agape. The crawler, a spider-like shadow that scuttles across ceilings. Even the twins, childlike shadows that mimic each other and speak in eerie unison, seen in cases across different countries with no shared origin. These figures appear again and again, across ages, continents, and Wi-Fi speeds. It's as though sleep paralysis isn't just an experience, it's a broadcast, and we're all tuned to the same channel. And then there's the really weird part. Some people claim the entities learn, that after each episode, the shadow figures become more active, more detailed, more aware, as if they're adapting. As if by noticing them, you're inviting them closer. One woman in Norway described years of episodes where the man just stood in the doorway, until one night he stepped closer, then closer still, until she could feel his breath. Another in Brazil reported drawing the same figure her grandmother had sketched decades earlier, unprompted, unknowingly. Coincidence? Pattern recognition? Or something more? You remember now, this story isn't about history frozen in the past. It's alive. These experiences continue, evolve, and mutate with us. We may not call them incubi or night hags anymore, but we still see them. We still wake drenched in sweat, heart hammering, air thick with dread. Modern culture reflects this beautifully. Horror films like The Babadook, Insidious, or Mara don't invent their monsters from scratch. They borrow from these exact experiences. The feeling of being frozen, the dark silhouette, the watcher. They tap into something primal, already known to the viewer, even if they've never put a name to it. And social media? It's the new village well, the new church pew. People gather on forums like Reddit and TikTok to share episodes, compare drawings, swap protection techniques. One popular post reads, "If you see the Hat Man, blink 3 times and think of your childhood home. He hates that." Fringe advice? Sure, but so was sleeping with a red ribbon in medieval France. We still pass down the same nervous wisdom, just through memes and comment threads now. And through it all, one thing remains constant: the emotion, the terror, the helplessness, the quiet, suffocating certainty that you're not alone, that something is in the room, just out of reach, just out of explanation. So tonight, as your eyelids grow heavier and your mind begins to uncurl, you might find yourself wondering, what if the stories are right? What if these are real? Visitors are real, and what if naming them is what calls them back? You roll over. At least you think you do. Sometimes it's hard to tell what's a movement and what's just a wish, especially now, especially with all these stories spinning like a mobile over your head, casting shadows where light should be. But tonight, let's try something else. Let's zoom in, not on demons or monsters, but on you, your body, your brain. Because at the core of every medieval tale, every whispered warning and holy water ritual is a very real, very human question. Why does this happen to me? Modern neuroscience has a rather unromantic answer. Sleep paralysis is a disconnect. It happens when your brain wakes up while your body is still in REM atonia, a state of natural paralysis designed to stop you from physically acting out your dreams. In other words, your consciousness arrives to the party early, and everything else is still sleeping. This is why people often experience a kind of dual perception during paralysis. You might be aware of your room, the fan whirring, the shape of your blanket, but also experience dreamlike elements layered on top. That shadow figure, that whisper, those are your brain's hallucinations, bleeding through the REM cycle like ink on wet parchment. Historians still argue whether these hallucinations are mere misfires or deeply rooted evolutionary responses, survival mechanisms honed over millennia. One theory suggests that your brain, sensing immobility and panic, fabricates a predator to explain the danger. After all, we evolved in a world where stillness often meant you were being hunted. That shadow figure, that's the ancient part of your brain screaming, "There's a lion in the cave." A fringe idea, but chillingly elegant. So what about the details? The sounds, the footsteps, the sensation of being watched? These two have roots in biology. Your temporal lobes, responsible for processing sensory information, go into overdrive during a paralysis event. They misinterpret silence as breathing. They turn creaking wood into footsteps. They take a coat hanging on a chair and promote it to man in the corner. And here's where it gets even trickier. Fear makes it worse. The more afraid you become, the more your brain floods with adrenaline and cortisol. Your heart races, your breath shortens, your amygdala, that ancient fear processor, starts firing on all cylinders. And your brain, desperate to explain this chaos, fills in the blanks with the worst things it can imagine. This is why so many sleep paralysis episodes feel like being watched, or hunted, or punished. Because your brain is basically flipping through every horror movie it's ever seen, trying to make sense of a moment that has none. And this isn't rare. It's estimated that between 20% and 40% of people will experience sleep paralysis at least once in their lives. For some, it happens once and never again. For others, it's a regular, terrifying visitor. Even famous people have reported it. Napoleon, Dickens, even Kanye West. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't need an invitation. But there's hope. Sleep researchers today know more than ever before. We know that sleep hygiene matters a lot. Keeping regular sleep hours, reducing caffeine and alcohol, limiting screen time before bed. These aren't just self-help tips, they're armor. A defense against the cracks in sleep that allow the shadow things to crawl through. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBTI, has also shown promise. It helps reframe the fear around the episodes, making them less traumatic. Some people even learn to use sleep paralysis as a gateway to lucid dreaming, taking control of the dream once they recognize the state. Still, for others, no amount of science soothes the fear. Because here's the twist. The explanation doesn't erase the experience. Knowing that a figure isn't real doesn't make its stare feel less cold. Understanding REM doesn't help when you can't move your arm and the door handle is slowly turning. It's a reminder that humans are layered. We're brains and bodies, but also emotions, memories, beliefs. And when all of those collide in the quiet hours of the night, science can only do so much. So what do? You breathe, you wait, you remind yourself, this will pass. You move your toes first, if you can. You focus on the ceiling, you blink. And when it's over, when your limbs finally respond and the shadow retreats, you lie still in the dawn light and whisper, "I survived again," just like they did. The monks, the milkmaids, the scribes, the soldiers, all of them, lying awake in silence, trying to make sense of a terror that science is only just beginning to understand. You are not the first. You will not be the last. And somewhere, even now, someone else is blinking into the darkness, waiting for their body to wake. The room feels a little heavier now, not with fear, but with understanding. With all the centuries of breathless gasps, clawing fingers, and silent screams that echo from the past. And as you lie there, warm under your blanket, The air between ancient and modern grows thinner still. Because if sleep paralysis has always haunted us, then so too has the question, why does it feel so real? Let's talk about shared hallucination, or what some researchers call cultural dreaming. This is where things get wonderfully strange, because somehow people who've never met, never read the same stories, never even lived in the same century, are describing the same things. Take that tall, shadowy man we mentioned. He appears in villages without electricity and in apartments with Netflix. The same goes for the weight on the chest, the inability to scream, the feeling that something is just off. Some believe this points to a universal archetype, a kind of primal nightmare hardwired into all of us. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, would have called this a collective unconscious, a shared pool of memory and symbolism that humanity taps into in dreams and altered states. Historians still argue whether Jung's theories were science or poetry, but there's no denying they offer a comforting logic. That maybe these shadow people aren't just personal nightmares, but universal ones. Echoes of ancient instincts carved into the folds of our brains. There's even a hypothesis that humans evolved with sleep paralysis as a defense mechanism. Imagine our earliest ancestors, alone, sleeping in caves, surrounded by predators. If the body could freeze while the brain remained alert, maybe they had a better chance of survival. That terrifying immobility could have once been our best weapon. A fringe tidbit for you. Some early 2000s researchers proposed that sleep paralysis might have been tied to shamanic initiation experiences. In various indigenous cultures, individuals who reported terrifying visions or dream paralysis were sometimes marked as chosen by the spirits. Not broken, not cursed, chosen. It's a beautiful twist. What if your terror means you're open to more? That your brain is reaching past the physical, past the rational, into something deeper? Of course, modern neuroscience rolls its eyes at that. But then again, not all scientists dismiss the emotional and symbolic power of these experiences. Many now agree, sleep paralysis isn't just about fear. It's about meaning. What we see during those episodes is shaped by our memories, our beliefs, our deepest vulnerabilities. It's like a haunted mirror. If you grew up religious, you might see demons. If you watch too many horror movies, you might see ghosts. If you're lonely, maybe you see someone watching, just so you don't feel so alone. And that's the key. The figure in the corner, the pressure on your chest, the whisper you almost understand, they're not just figments. They're reflections. Not of the world around you, but of the world inside. You begin to understand why the medieval mind clung to rituals, to prayers, to protection spells, not because they were naive, but because they were human, just like us, desperate for tools, for meaning, for a feeling of control over a thing that slips between the cracks of waking and dreaming. Tonight, maybe the room is quiet, maybe the visitor won't come, maybe you'll fall asleep to the sound of the fan, the rhythm of your breath, and the feeling of being small, but safe. But if you do wake up frozen, if the edges of the room start to blur, if something shifts near the foot of your bed, remember, it's been here before, with monks, with children, with scribes and queens and fishermen. It didn't start with you, and it won't end with you, but you'll get through it. And maybe, just maybe, it's trying to tell you something, not in words, not in language, but in presence. A truth older than medicine, a mystery deeper than sleep. A shadow that, like us all, just wants to be understood. The fire is low now, crackling gently in the corner of your imagination. You're past fear, past the racing heartbeat. What's left is curiosity, that quiet hum that always follows a good ghost story, or, in this case, 1,000 years worth of them. And maybe you're wondering, if so many people throughout history experience this, why isn't it more widely accepted? Why do we brush it off with just a dream, when people in medieval times built entire belief systems around it? Well, here's the thing. We're still doing it. Today, sleep paralysis sits in the awkward corner between medicine and myth, and most people don't realize how deeply it's influenced culture, especially in places where science and storytelling coexist rather than compete. Take Japan, for instance. There's a phenomenon called kanashibari, literally to be bound in metal. It's sleep paralysis, described exactly as we know it, immobility, fear, shadowy presence, but it's understood as a spirit encounter, a kind of ancestral haunting, and people talk about it openly. not as pathology, but as reality. Or Cambodia, where the experience is called Kmauch Sangkat, the ghost that pushes you down. It's often seen as a sign of unresolved guilt or bad karma. People seek spiritual cleansing, not just sleep therapy. Even in Newfoundland, there's the Old Hag, a legend where a witch-like figure sits on your chest while you sleep. People today still claim to get hagged. It's a part of the language. Historians still argue whether these beliefs are products of shared trauma, like genocide, war, or colonial memory, or whether they reflect something truly universal in the way humans process fear. But either way, the core experience remains unchanged. And now, it's seeping into pop culture like fog under a door. Video games like Little Nightmares and Alan Wake feature sleep paralysis-like moments. Films like The Nightmare, 2015, document real experiences from sufferers across cultures. And authors? Oh, they love it. From Lovecraft's cosmic horrors to Stephen King's Whispering Shadows, the theme is everywhere. What happens when you're trapped in your own body and something else knows it? And here's a fun fringe tidbit. Even aliens get involved. Yep, in the 1980s and 90s, many people who experienced sleep paralysis believed they had been abducted by extraterrestrials. The lights, the paralysis, the floating sensations, it all lined up. Some researchers argue the alien abduction phenomenon is just modern folklore layered over sleep paralysis. The demons just got shinier suits. So no matter the century, no matter the belief system, we return to the same primal fear. I was awake. Something was there. I couldn't move. And yet, some people flip the narrative. Rather than seeing themselves as victims, they become explorers. Modern lucid dreamers intentionally trigger sleep paralysis as a gateway to astral projection, spiritual journeys, or controlled dreaming. They prepare, they breathe through the fear, they call the shadow by name and walk through it. In that sense, sleep paralysis becomes not a curse, but a tool, a doorway, one that many are still learning to open without letting too much darkness in. There are communities online built entirely around this experience. People share tips. Sleep with your head slightly elevated. Play white noise. If you see the shadow, smile. It confuses it. One user swears by eating a banana before bed. Another recommends placing a notebook near your bed to write down what you see the moment you wake up. Because maybe it's not just about surviving the night, maybe it's about remembering it, understanding it, turning the terror into insight. And that, in the end, is what ties all of this together. The monks with their prayers, the villagers with their salt, the modern dreamers with their Reddit threads. We're all just trying to name the thing in the dark, to say, I see you. To ask, what are you? And maybe one day to whisper, thank you, for showing us how fragile we are, how brave we can be, and how, even in paralysis, we still reach for light. It's quiet now, that kind of quiet that feels old. Older than clocks, older than fire. Just your breathing, soft and steady in the distant memory of shadowy shapes fading like mist in morning light. And as we enter this final stretch of our journey, you begin to notice something strange. Not everything that haunts you means harm. Because in all the legends, all the parchment scribbles and whispered folklore and Reddit confessionals, there's one more thread. It's delicate, nearly invisible, but it runs through every story like a silver filament. You survived. You always did. Whether it was the medieval monk clutching his rosary as the devil pressed on his chest, the milkmaid in Normandy waking breathless after the night hag had passed, the student in Tokyo lying frozen as the kanashibari grinned from the ceiling, or you, last week blinking into the darkness, heart pounding. You're still here. And maybe that's the real meaning. Not the demons, not the science, not even the stories, but the fact that our species has endured this same terror over and over, and instead of breaking, we told stories. We lit candles, we whispered names, we folded fear into ritual and folklore and memes. We built meaning from paralysis. Historians still argue whether the continuity of sleep paralysis hallucinations means the phenomenon is neurological, cultural, or supernatural. But the one thing no scholar debates is this: sleep paralysis is a universal human experience, and it's one we've faced with trembling bravery for thousands of years. Even the church, with all its caution and superstition, understood something vital. You have to name the thing to weaken it. which is why exorcists insisted on knowing the demon's name, why villagers painted protective runes on their doors, why modern sufferers give their sleep visitor a nickname, the Hat Man, the Watcher, the one who waits. We instinctively fight powerlessness with language, and even in your weakest, most terrified moment, paralyzed in bed, heart skittering like a trapped moth, you're still doing it. You're naming it. That's courage. And maybe that's the whole story here. That sleep paralysis, for all its horror, is a mirror. It shows us how deep fear can go, but also how high we can rise through it. Tonight, you lie still in bed, not out of paralysis, but peace. The covers are warm, the air hums gently, the world beyond your walls continues its old, slow turning, and somewhere in the distant past, a scribe sets down his quill after describing the exact same figure you saw last year. He sighs, he dips his quill, he writes, "But when the figure vanished, I was free again. Praise be." Yes, praise be. You're free too. So let's soften now. Let your mind untangle. Let the threads of fear and curiosity slide away like smoke rising from a long burned out candle. The room around you, whether lit or dark, is your space. You've made it through not just the night, but centuries of haunted pages and sleepless souls. Your breath is steady now. Your limbs are yours again. There is no shadow in the corner, only the soft outline of a curtain or a coat you forgot to hang. The hallway is just a hallway. The silence, just silence. Even if your eyes close tonight and the paralysis returns, even if something presses near your chest and the air feels tight, you'll remember, this is just your brain flickering between worlds. This is just a story, one you've heard before, one you've survived before, one you can float through without fear. And when the morning comes, and it will come, you'll rise. You'll remember the stillness. You'll carry it like a shield. Because the real power, it's never belonged to the shadow, it's always been yours. Now drift, sweet listener, let the edges blur, let the weight lift, the candle's gone out, and the night is finally, truly yours.